Hi everyone, I hope this finds you doing well, staying healthy. I wanted to show a video of some work that I'm doing to add support for Salesforce Functions to Illuminated Cloud. If you're not familiar with Salesforce Functions, it's effectively a way to execute business logic outside of the traditional Salesforce cloud, not in Apex, but rather in Java or JavaScript or TypeScript, deployed into Heroku, but automatically authenticated into the corresponding organization, and to really work around some of the limitations, the imposed limitations via governor limits in the Salesforce multi-tenant environment. It really, I think, solves a problem that's existed, probably one of the main criticisms of the Salesforce stack for a long time, and that is the difficulty in doing any level of larger scale data processing in a more native fashion in Salesforce. And so this has been in beta for a little bit. It was announced quite a bit back, and it should go to general availability starting with winter 22, which I believe will be fully installed in October or so. So what I'm showing here is actually what you would call early days of the Illuminated Cloud integration, but my intention is to have a fully fleshed out end-to-end integration by winter 2022, so within the next, say, 5 to 6 weeks. And in fact, I would like to have an early version of the functionality I'm going to show and the stuff I'm going to describe but am not yet able to show. I'd like to have that available in maybe the next 2 weeks. That's my goal. Just depends upon other interrupts. So why don't we take a look? So as I mentioned earlier, these functions can be implemented in Java, in JavaScript, and in TypeScript. And they exist in a Salesforce project. So this is a traditional Salesforce project source format. You can see the metadata up here. There's not much of it. And then you can see another kind of top level subdirectory called functions, and then under that there's a subdirectory for each of the functions you've implemented, and the contents of those functions are going to be based upon the language of implementation. So a Java-based function is going to look like a traditional Java project and use Maven for its dependency management. JavaScript and TypeScript functions are going to be very similar, other than obviously the language of implementation, kind of ES6 or TypeScript, and are going to use NPM for their dependency management. But you can see there's quite a bit of flexibility here. And so they just slot right into an existing project, and the underlying IDE from JetBrains, it's paired with Illuminated Cloud, is going to dictate which types of functions can be implemented. So I'm in IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate Edition right now, which supports Java and TypeScript and JavaScript and a myriad of other languages. If you happen to be in, say, IntelliJ IDEA Community Edition, you'll have the ability to develop Java-based functions, but not TypeScript or JavaScript-based functions, at least not with any, truly rich IDE features for those languages. Conversely, if you're in WebStorm or PyCharm or PHPStorm or RubyMine, you won't be able to do Java functions, but you're going to be able to do JavaScript and TypeScript functions. My guess is very few people will be implementing functions in a heterogeneous manner. So the IDE that you pair with Illuminated Cloud, most people have probably already chosen based on languages that they already use to implement. If you already have an investment in Java, you're going to want IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate Edition. If you already have an investment, a heavy investment in JavaScript and TypeScript, WebStorm is probably your best bet. And then if you just want to write Java functions and want to do IC development and don't necessarily want a large investment on the JetBrains side, IntelliJ IDEA Community Edition is going to be a great pairing. All right, so with all that preface out of the way, let's just take a look at some things here. So your functions can execute in a couple of different manners during development. One of the ways they can execute that allows you to basically have a really nice, clean, efficient dev, test, fix cycle is just through your unit testing. And so this is a TypeScript function. These are very, very simple functions. And we can move over to its jest-based test suite, and we can actually execute that right here within the debugger. This is true of all three of the languages. And we can do interactive debugging. Now, again, I want to be really clear. This is interactive debugging. This is not retrospective debugging or log-based debugging like what we have with Apex. This is interactive debugging. You can watch the stack variables change, but I can actually change the variable values on the fly. I can evaluate expressions if I want, this dot, and I can sit here and actually do things on the fly to the running interpreter, to the running effectively virtual machine. So I'm going to run to the next breakpoint, and now I'm inside the test body, and the test body is actually going to execute the function itself. So I already have a breakpoint set there, so now we're in the function, and it's going to execute a query. Well, because this is a unit test and a true unit test, it runs in isolation. Its inputs and externals are mocked. And so when it ran that query, it didn't really run a query. Instead, it ran a function that was mocked to send back a specific response in the setup aspects of this test. Everybody knows how this works. I'm just trying to explain what you're seeing here. And then we can basically come back and we can verify those expectations, and then we can see the teardown for this test. So that's one way you can do it. Obviously, that's not running in a true environment, and you're running against mocks, which mocks are wonderful, but sometimes you want to see what happens in a true execution environment. Well, one way to do that would be to actually deploy this into the true backend, into Heroku. The good thing about that is you're in the exact runtime environment that you would have in production. The bad thing about that is you can't do interactive debugging. Now, I will be adding a dashboard, a function dashboard effectively to Illuminated Cloud, to the JetBrains IDEs. This is not it. This is actually the Docker dashboard, but it's going to be very similar in some ways. Instead of seeing containers and images, you're going to see functions, and you'll see deployments of functions, and you'll be able to see the logs of those functions like in Heroku. So as you go and execute your Heroku deployed function, you'll be able to watch its log go by. But again, for interactive debugging, what you can do is you can deploy your functions locally. I'm going to show some command line executions for the next phase of this demo, but what will happen by the time that this feature is made available is all of those will be integrated directly into the IDE, into that function dashboard, and you won't have to actually drop to the CLI. You'll just be able to right-click on functions, click buttons, things like that to say, I want to create a new function, I want to deploy this function to Heroku, or I want to deploy it to a local Docker container, I want to debug it, I want to invoke the function in either of its execution environments, things like that. So I just want to show what is possible, and some of these things will be integrated and automated going forward. So let's drop to the CLI, and I'm just going to go ahead, and I've changed directories into a JavaScript function. I'm going to start that function. Now, when I start that function, it's actually going to deploy it into a local Docker container for execution purposes. Now, you can even see the word Heroku sprinkled throughout this. It's not going to Heroku, but it's basically going to build an environment for my local Docker machine that looks as close to a production environment as it can without actually being in that production environment. This takes a few seconds. Something I'll show real quick while it's executing is just the IDE knows completely about all the APIs that are available for authoring of functions in all three of these languages based upon the various dependency management schemes, whether that's NPM or whether that's based on Maven or whatever it happens to be. And so if I want to, for example, go into this TypeScript-based function, and I'm just going to rewrite this line, but I'm going to use some of the IDE features. I can say await, context. You'll see that the code completion is very strong because it's the full TypeScript capabilities of IntelliJ IDEA or the JetBrains IDEs. One thing I will probably do is add code completion for some key functions here based upon string literals. For example, when you've got a SOQL query embedded in a call to query, just like I've done for dynamic SOQL in Apex. So we can do something like this, and then I can use the refactoring capabilities of the IDE. And I'll just go ahead and say my results, and then it actually will say this is never reassigned. Do you want to constify it? So all of those smarts that are built into the IDE are now available for your functions development. And that's also true when we go over to Java. In fact, we'll demonstrate that when we move to the next phase. Okay, so this has been deployed, and the last thing that it says is you can debug here. So I'm going to click that link, and it's connected to the debugger. And now what I'm going to do is open up the terminal again and do something else that will be fully integrated, where you can just go and run a function. And I'm going to tell this to run with an empty payload. This particular function doesn't really have any interesting inputs, so I'm just going to run it with the payload. Now, I am interactively debugging this function now executing in my local Docker container in as close to a manner as possible to its actual production environment. It is authenticated via the context into the Salesforce organization for this project. And so it's going to execute a real query against that organization. And if we look at those results, we'll actually see real records that were returned. So we can see that this is this ID and that name. And let's show very quickly that that is, in fact, the data we're working with. That's not mocked up. That's a true execution. So now we're actually working in an end-to-end, top-to-bottom fashion, but we're debugging server-side logic connected into our organization. And we can go back to the terminal and see that that completed execution, and here's the output of that, basically the JSON serialization of the result. And so we can see that. All right, so that shows you how that would work. Now I'm going to stop this container again. That'll be a point and click operation when I'm done. And I'm going to start the Java function. So I'm going to deploy that into Docker as well. And while that's happening, we'll go over and take a look at what a Java function looks like. As always with things, Java versus TypeScript or ES6+, it's going to be a little more wordy. I happen to be very familiar with and comfortable with Java, so this is kind of my home, but there's no question that it's a few more lines of code to get the same things done. But the same IDE features hold. Get org, .get data API, .query, and then I'm just going to kind of leave that blank, .get records. And then again, I can extract that into a variable, and I'll call those my records. And so all the capabilities of the IDE are available to you while you're authoring your functions, whether it's Java, JavaScript, TypeScript. Once this finishes deploying, one difference is going to be it's not going to actually show me a link to debug. So instead, what I'm going to have to do, and I've already done it in this case, is I'm going to have to create a remote JVM debug session. Now again, as part of the automation, when you create a function in Java, I'm going to automatically create one of these for you in Illuminated Cloud. But all it's going to do is set it up so that it will connect to the remote debugger. Now we just saw that information go by. So I'm just going to go ahead and say I want to debug this, and it will say connected. And now we're going to go and execute this Java function. So again, we're going to go over here to run. We're going to execute this Java function, and we're going to hit this breakpoint in this Java function. And so right now I'm in Java, and again, it is fully OAuthed into the org, fully authenticated into the org. It is executing that query, and in just a moment, when it comes back, we're going to have actual query results that we're going to be able to inspect. And so here they are, and we can take a look, and there's the field values, and then we can actually step through. Like I said, it's an interactive debugger, so we can change values, evaluate complex expressions, set conditional breakpoints, all those things that you like doing inside of a full-fledged debugger. All right, so that's Java. So I showed TypeScript, I showed JavaScript, I showed Java. Again, I basically mentioned that what you're going to see is something somewhat analogous to this. We'll go to the running container, and we can see the run log. We can see information about the actual runtime environment. That's the type of information I want to present. I can stop this if I want. I'll make it very easy through the functions dashboard to be able to start and stop functions, to execute against them, those types of things. So that's an overview. Again, I'm hoping to make this a first version of it available in the next week or two, and a first kind of broadly available version available in conjunction with the Winter 22 release. I'm really excited about this. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for a long time. I've had to implement kind of large-scale data lifting backends in AWS and in Heroku repeatedly, and had to figure out how to integrate those into the Salesforce ecosystem. The fact that this is all fully integrated, the fact that it has flexibility in the implementation languages, it's wonderful. Salesforce has done a great job. Needless to say, brand new technology from Salesforce, brand new set of features atop that technology in Illuminated Cloud. There will almost certainly be issues. If you find them once this feature's out there, just report them to me. If they're Illuminated Cloud features, I'll take care of them. If they're Salesforce features, whether that's the CLI or the actual function implementation, I will work with the reporter and Salesforce to get that logged with them and hopefully get it resolved quickly as well. All right, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you are staying healthy, and everybody take care. Thanks.